The topic that has been assigned to me is Truth in the Age of Disinformation. I'd like to begin by telling you about a film that you probably have seen yourselves. Some time ago, I saw a film about professional political strategists who do consultancy work for politicians, especially those who are still aspiring for public office. Their work consists basically in packaging their candidates, campaign in such a way that the public opinion, which they gauge through surveys, is influenced, of course, in favor of their candidates. I will never forget that opening scene, which is an interview with the character Jane Bondin, played by Sandra Bullock, being considered for a job. The first question was this: did you ever work for politicians you did not believe in? And her answer was, sure, I could convince myself many things if the price is right. And then the second question was, how important is honesty? And her answer floored me. She said, oh, truth is relative in politics. Truth is relative in politics. And she followed it up and she said, the truth is what I tell the electorate the truth is. Wow. You know, in that film, both the administration and the opposition candidates hire American political strategists for the same purpose. On the one hand, there is Jane Bondin, the character played by Sandra Bullock, who works as a consultant for the Bolivian presidential candidate. Of course, this is fictionalized. The name there is Pedro Castillo. And on the other hand, there's Pat Candy, who works for a very popular opposition candidate whose name is Rivera, and who is topping the surveys. Sorry, the setting is actually before the digital technological revolution. They are still dependent on print and broadcast media for information dissemination. And each camp is spending a huge amount of money. This is familiar to us. Paying a whole staff of campaign assistants and consultants, and most of them behaving already like our modern trolls in the age of social media. Modern trolls whose task is to engage in smear campaign against the contenders in order to sway the public opinion against them and to achieve for their candidates high ratings in the surveys. Their primary objective is obviously to get their candidate to win by hook or by crook. Truth and morals are the least of their concerns. The majority of the public that they are trying to influence are just numbers. They are just figures in a survey. They are just a mass of nameless, faceless, unthinking people whose opinions could easily be swayed by manipulated information drive whose actual objective is disinformation. But make no mistake about it. The strategists are not always after telling lies either. You know, their typical strategy is to pick up a little bit of truth and to twist it or to use it as a weapon for demolishing the contender or as a means of conditioning minds towards adopting a specific mindset. The first most important step for the political packaging is what they call a quest for a brand. The branding is most essential for them, as is done by consumer products in grocery stores and supermarkets. I didn't know that politicians were also packaged. In the film, Jane Bondin is able to persuade her candidate, Pedro Castillo, to shed off the typical clean, decent, and straight corporate image which most of the other candidates anyway were trying to project during their campaign. She's very clever. Remember, she's not a political strategist for nothing. She does this by really packaging Castillo. She says you have to, for packaging, you have to convince people that in not so normal times like theirs, he is exactly the kind of leader that they need. So he had to get rid of his formal coat, roll up his sleeves like someone always ready to work. He should not hesitate to punch an enemy or to hurl cuss words and project a tough guy or a strongman image. And like I said already, convince people that these are not so normal times. They're a time of crisis. That in a time of crisis, he is exactly the kind of leader that they need. Well, this explains now why the film is entitled Our Brand is Crisis. The basic narrative is that all the other typically decent candidates were nothing but a bunch of hypocritical elitists. Our brand is crisis. Wow. You know, honestly, while I was watching this movie, I couldn't help but see a lot of eerie parallelisms with our existing state of affairs in the Philippine politics today. The most obvious one was the candidate whom Jane Bondin was hired to work for. How he rose from obscurity to extreme popularity because of the way he had been branded, and branded quite successfully. I recall how similar lines had been routinely peddled during the whole election campaign period in 2016 here in the Philippines. The only difference probably is that much of it was done in the social media. In the film, it's still basically print and broadcast media. But in the 2016 election, much of it was done in the social media, which is the cheapest and most efficient way of reaching the majority of the electorate. You know, I imagine the same Jane Bondin briefing her candidate and saying, our brand is crisis. Crisis caused by drugs, criminality, and corruption. There is no need for real statistics. The important thing is to bloat the figures about drug use, exaggerate them, and say addressing this problem is a matter of life and death. Our solution is a strong man, one who talks tough, one who would not hesitate to make shortcuts, one who would not allow himself to be hindered by legalities and human rights concerns in the fight against illegal drugs and the task of getting rid of criminality and corruption. You know, since the millennials hardly have any memory of the dictator anymore, now is the perfect occasion to revise history and present the former dictator as the best. Present the former dictator as the best leader our country ever had, as a leader whom the pro-American oligarchs succeeded in vilifying and ousting, to present him exactly as the kind of leader that we need again now in this time of crisis. Does it sound familiar to you? Disinformation has become a full-time job in the age of social media. As Jane Bondin said, truth is relative. When you say truth, whose truth? What is the criterion for the truth? In the psychology of the social media, the criteria for truth are indeed changing. Among the principles are the following. There are, after all, some criteria. Here are the typical criteria. If it is trending, it must be true. If he's leading the surveys, then maybe he's the guy to vote for, who loves a loser anyway. I'd rather trust somebody who flaunts his immorality than those hypocrites who have skeletons in their closets. If most of the comments about him are negative, he probably really deserves them. These are, unfortunately, the common criteria for truth in the social media. That is why we need to talk about the truth. And I hope you allow me, just for a while, to engage you in a full philosophical discussion about the meaning of truth, the quest for truth. According to Aristotle, truth is to say of what is that is and what is not that is not. You never say you never say what is not. You don't say what is not is. It's always what is that is and what is not that is not. It's a basic conformity of knowing with reality out there. But later modern philosophers like Bernard Lonergan, for example, would react to this understanding. Lonergan would say, truth involves more than just conformity. It demands fidelity. And take note of his definition of the truth. He says, truth is the cognitive fidelity of knowing to be. And please take note of the word fidelity. Fidelity or faithfulness presupposes a relationship. This was the same direction that was taken by yet another philosopher at a later stage in his philosophical career. His name is Ludwig Wittgenstein. But there is a difference between the thinking of this man in his earlier years than his thinking in his later career. The earlier Wittgenstein presupposed that the truth is always a one-on-one correspondence between the knower, what the knower knows, and what there really is out there. In his earlier writings, like the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he said, whereof one knows not, thereof one speaks not. In plain language, we have no right to speak about what we do not know, as simple as that. That is why, for him, the earlier Wittgenstein, God talk is nonsense. This is the basic premise of the earlier Wittgensteinian agnosticism. You don't know anything about it, don't talk about it. Well, this would change. In his later writings, the same Wittgenstein, the later Wittgenstein, in his philosophical investigations, would admit the complexity of truth-seeking. He abandoned his own theory, even if other thinkers continued to hold on to it. He began to speak instead about the complexity of truth-seeking, as evidenced by the kind of language game that it requires. For example, let me simplify it for you. A dog is a dog, not a snake. A man is a man, not a dog. That's obvious. Is that true? Yes. You cannot say a dog is a snake. That cannot be true. But sometimes we say things like, that man is a lap dog, or that man is a snake. And you nod and you say, it's true. It's true not in a literal sort of way, but in an analogous sort of way, metaphorically speaking. Well, this is what the later Wittgenstein would now call the language game. He calls the use of metaphors a different language game, as evidenced by the language used by theology and other similar disciplines. Remember how Galileo defended himself when he was tried by the authorities for allegedly questioning biblical truth in his scientific theories and thus accused of committing heresy. But Galileo defended himself. He stood his ground and he said, "Excuse me, I am a scientist, not a theologian. I am talking about how the heavens go and not how to go to heaven." Those are two different disciplines altogether. And it goes the same way with evolution on the one hand and creation on the other hand. There are two distinct statements about the world. One is scientific, the other one is theological. They do not necessarily contradict each other. They are just two distinct ways of using language to describe the truth. So, on recognizing the complexity of the human language game, which Wittgenstein says is incurably metaphorical, he shifts now. From whereof one knows not, thereof one speaks not. Later on, he would say, whereof one knows not, thereof one rambles and stammers, making an effort to make sense in expressing the truth through language. You make a statement and allow it to be challenged by other seekers of truth in a mature process of dialogue. A mature process of dialogue. We never seek the truth alone. And let me emphasize that. We always do it as part of a community of truth seekers. Nobody has a monopoly of the truth. It is important for the truth seekers to enter into a community of other truth seekers. I'm going to say something about this, community of truth seekers later on in relation to our situation in the country. The later Wittgenstein would recognize that truth demands a commitment. So this is parallel to Lonergan's cognitive fidelity. The truth demands a commitment. And that commitment is not just to what there is, but also to what there ought to be or what there should be. The latter refers to the two other characteristics of being. In philosophy, they say the attributes of being are three. Number one, truth. Number two, goodness. And number three, beauty. The true, the good, and beautiful. I remember there was a first lady who used to call herself the epitome of the true, the good, and beautiful. Wow, what a blasphemy, Anyway, let's continue. Not only is human intelligence able to grasp what is, but also what should be. That which could be yet from what presently is now. You see, human imagination is able to develop an insight, not just into things in their actuality, but also in their potentialities. And what brings this about is the active interaction between the knower, the knowers, and the objects that are known. And that is why truth, as an attribute of being, cannot be separated from the other attributes of goodness and beauty. Some people who question the existing state of affairs and advocate a new kind of economic and political order may engage not just in the laying out of the facts about the present condition, but also in the propagation or promotion of an ideology that runs counter to the current system that is behind the present condition. And take note, this is a neutral thing. The word that is used is propaganda. But propaganda is a neutral thing. It's not necessarily negative. So this is what we commonly call propaganda. And take note that even the church is running a Vatican Curia named Propaganda Fidei, the propagation of the faith. Propaganda pala just means propagation, promotion. And don't we all promote ideas? Sometimes it happens that some people, however, get so obsessed with an ideology, and that happens very often to the so-called fundamentalists, which is, according to a scholar named James Barr, more of a psychological condition. Instead of telling the truth about the existing state of affairs, they present caricatures or even deliberate misinformation for sinister purposes. And this is what I call the negative sense of propaganda. And this has become the more common negative meaning of an otherwise neutral word. This is the common accusation heard, for example, by typical right-wing politicians against the left, accusing them of pure propaganda, while they themselves are actually involved in propaganda. So, the task of finding out which propaganda is faithful to or grounded on the truth is precisely a whole philosophical issue. You see, the quest for truth is inevitably a philosophical issue. Specifically, it is epistemological. Sorry for that big word, Pero simple lang ang meaning nito. It's just a very simple meaning. Epistemology means it is not enough that we know. It is important also that we know, and we know that we do not know. That's epistemology. It's not just about knowing, but knowing about knowing. One of the more important issues in epistemology is this fundamental question. Is there such a thing as false knowledge? Can I call it knowledge if it is not true? Well, apparently, this is a contradiction in terms. How can I call it knowledge if it is false? That's a contradiction in terms. Knowing presupposes interest in establishing the truth. It presupposes following some criteria for distinguishing between what is and what is not, whether it be about truth, about goodness, or about beauty. For believers, the quest for truth is more than just a philosophical endeavor. It is also theological. It is also a spiritual and moral issue. Because we associate the quest for truth with the quest for God, truth is supposed to be a spiritually impelled moral imperative. That is why, when it comes to truth, we love to quote Jesus, who said in John 14, verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In John 8:32, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In John 4:23, Jesus, talking to the Samaritan woman, said, the time is coming, and has indeed come, when people will no longer worship God in this or that mountain, but in spirit and in truth. And in John 18:37-38, remember that conversation with Pontius Pilate? Jesus said, I came to testify to the truth. And Pilate reacted, and he said, what is the truth? Wow, this suddenly reminds me of the interview with Jane Bondin, the character played by Sandra Bullock in that film that I just spoke to you about a while ago. Well, truthfulness is a presumed value in the Judeo-Christian faith. That is why one of the 10 commandments, which is commandment number 8, is, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. In plain language, thou shalt not tell a lie. It's a sin to tell a lie in Christian tradition. I wonder if in the present circumstances, some people still really believe that it is a sin to tell a lie. And we always portray the evil one in the scriptural narratives as the purveyor of falsehood. In fact, Satan is typically caricatured as the prince of lies. in Christian tradition, the Prince of Lies. Yesterday was Easter Sunday, and on the occasion of Easter Sunday, Christians usually renew their baptismal vows. And take note that the first of these vows is the question, do you renounce evil? How can you even claim to be a believer in the Trinitarian God who is a creator, a redeemer, and a sustainer if you have not, first of all, renounced evil? In the scriptures, the purveyors of disinformation are often portrayed as instruments of the evil one. For example, the snake character in Genesis chapter 3, who twists a little bit of truth and leads Adam and Eve to an outright lie. He begins with a little question, is it true that God does not allow you to enjoy of the fruits of any of the trees in this garden? And obviously it was a lie. That is why Eve objected and said that is not true. As a matter of fact, we're allowed to eat of any of the fruits here except of the tree of knowledge of good and bad. And then he would lead them precisely to their fall and says, why so? If you eat of that fruit, you shall be like God, knowing good and evil. You'll be powerful, you'll be God already, so what do you need God for, Or the character of Cain in Genesis chapter 4. Remember, he's also lying when God asks him, where is your brother? He murdered his own brother. And here is his reaction. He gives God a cold shoulder and he says, why are you looking for my brother from me? Am I my brother's keeper? And we also have the wicked accusers of Susanna, who gave a false testimony that Susanna was an adulterer, which was not true. It was the exact opposite. It was because they were interested to have sexual relations with her, and she had objected. And the detractors of Jesus and their false testimonies against him before Pontius Pilate. Listen to the charges raised against Jesus. We found this man misleading our people. He opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar and maintains that he is the Messiah, a king. There's no basis for these charges. They are false charges. And so Pontius Pilate said to Jesus, oh, you are a king. And Jesus answered, you're the one saying so. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. That's who I am. Someone who is always on the side of the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice, he says. And Pilate said to him, again, the popular question, what is the truth? Well, if you remember, I mentioned a while ago about Lonergan's definition of the truth as a cognitive fidelity. The cognitive fidelity of knowing to being. And it is important to note that the act of knowing itself involves the dynamics of experiencing, understanding, and judging. You cannot say it's hard to say we know if we don't go through the dynamics of experiencing, understanding, and judging. Although, of course, sometimes we understand things if we did not directly experience them, but we can sort of vicariously experience them through the information that we get from other people. And we can analyze what the information that's passed on to them, even if this might not be our personal experience, because we have our rational faculties to understand the meaning of, and value of what is being presented to us. And we can make a judgment whether it is not true, it is true or not. And Lonergan says, well, actually, this is going to be the later Lonerganians, The later disciples of Bernard Lonergan would propose the addition of deciding. Experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding as being of utmost importance as well in the quest for truth. Some of you probably follow my Facebook postings. In one of my recent postings during the Holy Week, I noted that Pontius Pilate gave the people a chance to vote. Which of the two prisoners deserved to be released for the Passover festival? And the choice was between Jesus and Barabbas. The people elected Barabbas, and they had Jesus crucified. Why? Because they were relying on the strong public opinion that the Sadducees had successfully generated against Jesus. You know, I ended that Facebook post with a question. Will your vote this coming May be for Jesus or for Barabbas? Well, I think I can say it can only be for Jesus if the truth still matters to the one who is voting. Informed by the dynamics of knowing the truth, through the dynamics of experiencing, understanding, judging, and actually making a stand, making a decision in favor of the truth. You know, a while ago, in my dialogue with Patricia, I told her that I jotted down some of my own personal concerns about the communitarian quest for truth as one of the important expressions of democracy. Truth, for me, is a participatory endeavor. Nobody has a monopoly of it, not even the Pope, whom we claim to be infallible as Catholics, you know. We claim him to be infallible in matters of faith and morals. But even the Pope anchors his teachings on synodal consultations. So you see, if we're interested in the truth in our present circumstances in the Philippines, it should matter a lot, you know, that someone's claim of the truth is challenged sincerely, not maliciously, by another person, so that we can make sure that what is peddled as truth is not plain propaganda or worse, character assassination. It matters a lot that we know what the truth is when families of victims claim that their loved one did not fight back, hindi nanlaban, and did not have a gun or shabu in his possession. It matters a lot that the veracity of a police report is properly established, especially when it is contested as a false testimony and has caused the loss of lives. You know, I have encountered quite a lot of journalists who have done, you know, a careful critique of some police reports, and they laugh that in many instances they are templates. Sometimes they didn't even succeed in changing the names. This is a disservice to truth and democracy, especially when authorities immediately dismiss these as false allegations instead of promising to conduct an impartial investigation. Usually that is the least that we would expect from people in authority, to say, we will conduct a partial investigation. It matters a lot that we protect the witnesses or the truth sayers, especially when it is the police authorities themselves who are accused. It matters that when families claim that their loved ones have been illegally arrested, especially in circumstances where the police may have simply barged in without warrant, that what happened was not an invitation, but an assault. Let's call a spade a spade. When families claim that their little children have not been rescued, but arrested, it matters that we know the real statistics. For example, about drug use. It matters that we know if they're just being bloated deliberately, that they're not in accordance anymore with reality. It matters that allegations are proven, that people are presumed innocent before they are proven guilty, that people are not publicly vilified without a factual basis, that the legal system, the judiciary, works independently, imperfect as it may be. It matters to know if the elected legislators are truly representing the interests of their constituents and not those of the big business corporations or those of their political allies. Social communication and information dissemination has indeed been democratized by the social media. It has also been perverted by it. The mainstream media, at least, are expected to go by some rules. Of course, they don't always follow them themselves. Expected to go by some rules or to abide by some ethical standards and principles. There are no such rules in social media. You would expect that someone who is disseminating false information should be delisted, but no such thing is happening. Well, I am glad that Facebook as a company is now beginning to wake up to the need for such monitoring and control. The capacity to distinguish between truth and falsehood, between real and fake news, is now being left to the critical faculties of the social media users, who come from different levels of education, different walks of life, and various religious affiliations. And so you see why I insist that truth is not just a political issue. It is above all a moral and spiritual issue. Moral principles may find their basis in faith and religion, but are not always necessarily anchored in them. Human rights and civil liberties, like freedom of religion, freedom of expression, for example, are universally accepted values. They are shared not just by believers, but by most non-believers as well. What can be done in these circumstances? You know, a lot of things can be done, definitely, but I would like to pose this challenge, especially to the academic, that through education, the critical faculties of students are really shaped and formed, that they get to really know what it means to know. That is the epistemological issue I was talking about. The gamut of experiencing, understanding, judging, and making correct decisions. Secondly, that through proper legislation, the social media are monitored along specific standards and criteria for truthfulness. And lastly, the truth tellers be given due protection by independent agencies, especially when abuses are committed by those in power and authority. Thank you.